How powerful is the Switch 2 is probably the second most asked question after why do these games cost so damn much? The only thing Nintendo will officially say is that the Switch 2 has a custom processor made by Nvidia, and Nvidia have said that it's 10 times more powerful than the original Switch. And of course, people across the internet have done in-depth analysis on the footage shown, and from the hands-on experience events around the world, I sure would have liked to go to one of those. And they've paired that analysis up with the rumours and leaks that have happened for a long time before the official Switch 2 reveal. And they've come up with a rough estimate of what we can expect in raw numbers for Switch 2's power. But none of that answers the real question people are actually asking. And that's, what will the games look like and how will they run? In short, will they look any good? There are some facts we can glean from these analyses, and from the games announced and the footage we've seen. First, it's not as powerful as the PS5 or Xbox Series X. Fact. And if you expected it to be, then I really don't know what to tell you. Comparing a device not much bigger than my phone to two monolithic structures that stand overbearingly next to my TV like some villainous skyscraper should be the new definition of insanity. We do know that it is more powerful than a PS4 Pro, or at least it's able to get better performance than one. I'd wager it has the Steam Deck easily beaten too, and it comes in smaller, sleeker, and with a bigger screen than the Steam Deck. And how do I know this? Well, the games, and that's really all I care about. Whilst I don't really care about the actual raw numbers, the great people over at Digital Foundry have analysed the footage we've been shown, and the games are getting better performance than the Steam Deck and PS4 counterparts. Let's take Cyberpunk 2077, for example. This is a game that launched as an absolute mess, and now it's been, I want to say, fixed? It's running a lot better and has become a sort of performance benchmark game. But how did they improve it to get to the point it's at now? Well, by the complete and utter abandonment of the PS4 and Xbox One, forever dooming those systems to be stuck on version 1.6, and without the expansion pack Phantom Liberty, whilst the PS5 counterpart is currently at version 2.2, presumably the version the Switch 2 will get. These older systems just weren't powerful enough to keep pace with the changes they had to make to get the game running acceptably on any system at all. So there's absolutely no way CD Projekt Red or Nintendo are going to want to repeat any part of that disastrous launch. Now, of course, I am never going to try and claim that the Switch 2 is going to be the best way to play Cyberpunk 2077, because, well, it's definitely not going to be. But it may be the best way to play it handheld and on the go, certainly at this price point. And if Cyberpunk proves that the Switch 2 is beefier than the PS4, then Street Fighter 6 could be the game to show the Switch 2 could well be playing in the same ring as current generation consoles. Well, Xbox Series S, but that's technically this gen, right? Either way, comparison videos of Street Fighter 6 show that the Switch 2 version of the game seems to look a lot better than the Series S version. And you get to play it handheld. And with Amiibo support! We all still care about Amiibo, right? Right, guys? Amiibo! Switch 2 clearly has better textures than Series S, particularly when it comes to character skin, muscle definition, and those bulging veins. They all look much better on the Switch 2, and quite a bit better. But why is this? Because the numbers seem to suggest that Series S is more powerful than the Switch 2. Well, I think it comes down to performance over power and the efficiency of more modern technology. Things like deep learning tensor cores and ray tracing dedicated RT cores, as well as DLSS, set the Switch 2 apart from the PS5 and Xbox Series X in terms of modern technology. Although the PS5 Pro does feature its own DLSS called PSSR. Sony, stop rebranding things that already exist, please. Thank you. So, whilst the raw power may not stack up against Series S, the efficiency and utilization of newer tech may make up for that gap, but it's still too early to tell. What we do know for sure is that Switch 2 is absolutely somewhere between PS4 and Series S, similar to how the original Switch was somewhere between PS3 and PS4, maybe a bit closer to PS3. So what are the big N themselves doing with all this new tech and increased horsepower? what they've always done, making sure to increase gameplay options and offer gameplay experiences that they couldn't create before Switch 2. And Donkey Kong Bananza is a great example of this. The game looks excellent visually. Apart from that, it has that great Nintendo look and feel that I love so very, very, very much. But I don't think it's reaching the upper limits of what the console can do. Again, it looks great. I'm not saying otherwise. I love it, apart from that. Now, I know that the PS2 and Xbox 360 had some games that had fully destructible environments like Hulk Ultimate Destruction. And the point of that game was, well, Hulk Smash. And people loved it, but this has to be one of the weaker games visually from that PS2 era of gaming. I mean, just 6 months later, Final Fantasy XII released, and just look at that game. On the same system, it's so much better visually. And yes, that's because of a bigger budget, probably a much bigger budget, but we're also not having to sacrifice visual fidelity in Final Fantasy for ultimate destruction! And that brings me back to Donkey Kong Bananza. It's arguably the best looking Nintendo game to date. Arguably. But it also probably sacrifices graphical fidelity to have these insanely destructible environments. To my knowledge, this may be the most versatile and destructible environment we've ever gotten in a video game, and particularly in one that looks this good. And that's because Nintendo does things differently. They always have. They look at processing power and think, how do we leverage this into new and exciting gameplay experiences that we couldn't do previously? Whereas nearly every other studio on the planet is concerned with creating the most pixel-perfect skin shader or the most realistic glass-shattering effect. And for me, those things don't massively improve my gameplay experience. In fact, I'm not sure they do at all. Take Mario Kart World, for example. Nintendo knew they had to do something different for a brand new Mario Kart, and it had to be something the Switch was incapable of doing. And that's an open world that can be traversed at speed and shown to 4 cameras for split-screen play, on top of improved visuals. And there's a limit to how far you can take any one of those things without sacrificing the others. Now, you can argue that Mario Kart doesn't need an interconnected open world, and I certainly see your point, but would you have been satisfied if they just released Mario Kart 9 and it just looked like Mario Kart 8 but with a graphics bump and some new courses? I mean, they did that. It was called Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and then again with the booster course pass that basically doubled Deluxe's content. And keep in mind that from day one, you can play Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on Switch 2. And probably with improved resolution and frame rate. So knowing that, would you still grab the new Mario Kart if it was just more courses and a graphics bump? I know I'd be much less interested. And it's not the first time. The original Switch/Wii U allowed them to reinvent Zelda with Breath of the Wild. I mean, it's not even the first time Zelda introduced or expanded a gameplay feature, added a brand new mechanic, or broadened our mind with a new dimension to play in, all thanks to a brand new system. So Nintendo leveraged the Switch 2's new performance and came up with a new way to play and interact with a Mario Kart game. But third-party devs are clearly finding the Switch 2 capable enough to get their games onto the platform. For me, it was an incredible surprise to see Final Fantasy VII Remake, Elden Ring, Street Fighter VI, and much more make it to the console in its launch year, showing that it's not taken years of optimization and cutting features to make the games work on Switch 2. Of course, all of these games have PS4 versions, but Borderlands 4 doesn't. And that makes it the first current-gen game to make it to the Switch 2. But it's not going to be the last. IO Interactive announced their upcoming Project 007, James Bond game, will also be coming to the Switch 2, and this will be a later-end PS5 generation game, with all the AAA bells and whistles you'd expect, I assume, and somehow that's also coming to Switch 2. And let's not forget, possibly the hottest developer at the moment is developing an exclusive title for the Switch 2, The Dustbloods, and it looks visually great. From Software often prioritize performance and art style over raw graphical power, so it makes the Switch 2 a perfect fit for this studio, as that's Nintendo's mentality as well. So what Nintendo has done then is provide developers with options. A studio like CD Projekt Red can target 30 frames per second at 1080p, And then a small indie dev with pixel art graphics can target 1080p at 120 frames per second. And Nintendo themselves might target the next Zelda to be 60 frames per second, 1440p. We could hope. God, I hate all the numbers. I personally hoped the Switch 2 would be matching PS4, or even pushing the PS4 Pro level of performance. And to find out that it actually might be closer to Series S, it's an incredible surprise. If you were expecting a device of this size that can also run off a battery to be equal to or surpass the PS5, then I really genuinely don't know what to say to you. The cost and bulk of this thing would have to be equally gigantic. Let's not forget that from within the Nintendo ecosystem, this is a huge difference between Switch 1 and Switch 2. And I'd argue, based on the evidence we've seen, it's a bigger difference than PS4 to PS5. It is the most powerful Nintendo system we've had this far, obviously. And that means we'll get the best looking Zelda, Mario, Metroid, Pokemon. Please make Pokemon look good. And if you don't agree, then I'm just going to point you straight back to Donkey Kong Bananza, the best looking Donkey Kong game and even Mario game ever made. And if I'm being honest, I think Nintendo have had the power right, even in the Switch 1 days. Granted, the Switch 1 went on too long and did become too weak in its last 2 or so years. But game development time has gotten huge, and budgets are spiraling, and the industry is in a pretty crazy place. And I believe that it's partly because games chase the best graphics too much. And they do that because we, the market, keep wanting better and better graphics. Nintendo's approach allows technologies and techniques to mature and become easier and cheaper to utilize. Ray tracing and screen resolution are a perfect example of my point. These were things that had to be brute forced through raw power. Even the PS5 has to. But now, even the top-end graphics cards are utilizing dedicated cores for things like DLSS and ray tracing to increase frame rate and resolution. And this is the same technology that the Switch 2 is now using. Ultimately though, what you think about the Switch 2's performance will be how much you prioritize raw computing power. And if it's high on your list, then you probably own a high-end gaming PC anyway. So what were you wanting this device to do exactly? I'm incredibly happy to find out that the Switch 2's power is at the very least comparable to the PS4. That console had some incredibly good-looking games on it. And if we're being honest, does the PS5 really look that much better with all of its increased power? The Switch 2 has exactly the power it needs to have for what Nintendo wants the system to be. And if Switch 1 sales are anything to go by, it's also what a large chunk of the market, and myself, wants this console to be. Please do subscribe, like, and comment to keep it here for more Switch 2 content. See you in the next one.